Good afternoon all. My name is Wes, your facilitator of today's webinar, and I'll be joined by Craig Webb as well as Paul Walsh. They are two really, how would I say, experienced individuals with both backgrounds in New Zealand Police as well as a lot of tactical experience. So I think we're in for a really good time today. And thank you very much for coming today, everybody that's attending. And James, thank you for sharing with us your knowledge of today, because it's really you know, a topical type of things of what's happening currently within New Zealand. Well, I won't just say New Zealand, I'm pretty sure abroad in general. So I just don't want to single out New Zealand by that. But yet again, welcome everybody. Today, like I said, we are hosting the webinar Shop Care, and I would like to just to let everybody know that today's call is recorded for learning purposes, and we will also be sharing it on our YouTube channel. If I may ask, Craig, could you just bring up our slideshow for us quickly? Share your screen, and then we can get the ball rolling. All mics are muted, guys. So if you want to ask either the presenters or myself a question, make sure that you use the question and answer functionality. And if there's any other assistance or general comments that you want to throw out there, make sure you use the chat function. Then there will be a couple of poll questions throughout today's webinar session, so please look out for those. Bear in mind that all live results are anonymous, so please feel free to answer them honestly. Okay. A bit about on Shop Care side. For those who don't know, as we've got a couple of work streams. One is critical risks. We've just finished our critical risk exposure report when it comes to our respective industry, which is retail supply chain. Watch out for that. We're just going through a couple of final steps, with key stakeholders before we're making that public. We've got other couple of resources like hierarchies of controls and driver guides that we've done with the AA Motoring Company. So you can just go around to our website and look for those, because we're in the business of connecting people to people and people to solutions, because we really want to create those safer workplaces for businesses rather sooner than later. Another work stream that we've got currently going is VAB, which is violent and aggressive behavior. This is mainly towards public-facing workers. We're currently doing a bit of a work around de-escalation with Skills VR, and you'll be able to see more of that in the very near future. We've got another project coming we're working on, but unfortunately I can't speak too much about that. But this will be a big one, definitely coming around in the next week or so. So please watch out for that. We're very excited about that project. We're also doing a bit of work around site markings with WorkSafe. My colleague of mine is really focused in that aspects, and that will be live for all public to see as well very soon. Then talking about participative ergonomics, which is mainly manual handling, guys. We've got a bit of focus on First Move, which is yet again a resource for you to join our website and go see what manual handling training there is to offer. We also will be focusing on early intervention and injury management. So especially when it comes to discomfort, we'll try to do some early intervention around there to restrict any discomfort turning into an actual injury. And then once it's actually injury has occurred, how can we manage that and get the worker back to pre-injury state? So guys, please, like I said, just go over to our website, have a look, see. There's quite a lot of information and resources and tools on there for you to use. Also, as I mentioned, just go look into our channel, our YouTube channel. There's quite a number of resources on there. One of the webinars coming this month still is Jemima Briggs. She's the General Manager of First Security, and her topic as well as the same as today as personal safety and security. Jemima also comes with a wealth of experience. So please watch out for that one and register your place. So that's enough from my side, guys. I'll be handing over to Paul. I'll still be in the background, guys. So I'm just be muting my mic and switching off my camera, but I will still be there to support the hosts, the panelists, as well as all participants. Thank you, Paul. It's over to you.
Thanks, Wes. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to come in and speak with you today. Paul Walsh is my name from QRisk and QRisk training. And if I just take a little brief moment to give you a little bit of the backstory, which might help to speak to a little bit of credibility in this topic, perhaps. My foundation career is inside the New Zealand Police. Most of that time was inside the tactical units, the Armed Defenders Squad and the Special Tactics Group, where I had the privilege to work alongside Craig Webb, our next speaker. In that group, I had the roles as a tactical operator, a team leader, and then finished out my time as the person in charge of training and development for that group. From there, leaving the police, went to the private security sector overseas, worked in a number of countries overseas, principally around looking after organizations and their people, both at a strategic and at a tactical level. And that brings us to QRisk, founded back here in New Zealand. Two parts to our business: the operational side. So we still do the doing. We still come into organizations and help with consultancy and support. And then we've got our training side. And that training side is largely focused around aggressive customer kind of situations and other incident types that impact on people's safety and security. So that's a brief background. Please, if you've got a pen and paper handy and you want to ask some questions, we've got a Q&A session at the end of the session, like Wes spoke to, and happy to be challenged on anything that I say over the next 20 minutes or so. So let me start by scene setting, what I think is a little bit of current state here in New Zealand. There is a growing tide of aggressive customer situations and situations where violence is used in the workplace. So in this discussion, we will focus a bit on those situations at the extreme end and how developing or strengthening your health, safety and security culture with a focus around situational awareness as a good thing. I do understand that we've got people from Countdown here. I will touch at a very high level the tragic incidents that occurred in the Countdown supermarkets last year. That's done with a huge amount of empathy towards your staff. Man, those were tough gigs, tough situations for people to go through, both staff and customers. So my thoughts are with your people. We work with a number of clients across multiple industries who are talking to this same problem statement. They are certainly experiencing a rise in customer aggression. And if we look at a scale, say from 1 to 10, the incidents that occurred at a Countdown are most definitely at a 10, right? We had people stabbed in our supermarkets. But the organizations that we are dealing with are certainly seeing an increase in situations that are in that 6, 7 and 8 range. So they're not making the headlines, but they are aggressive and they are violent. And if there is one thing that is consistent in the training that we develop, either off the shelf or fully tailored or leader-led programs we implement, it's the importance of situational awareness as a life skill. So with that as the sort of scene set for today's discussion, if I can start with a bit of an opening statement, and I'm going to read this because it's from a white paper that we're kind of writing in the background. So in a 6-month window last year, we had multiple people stabbed in supermarkets. One was where the offender was fueled by rage, had a propensity for violence, and a dependency on medication. The other was driven by a misplaced religious ideology. However, none of that mattered to the people stabbed at that moment in time. And these are just 2 recent examples of angry, violent people using extreme violence and weapons to inflict as much damage as they can in the execution of their uncontrolled rage. This occurred at someone's workplace, and that place was very much a high volume customer place. If we go back further in our history, there are other violent acts that have been committed in workplaces that we should be aware of. The stabbing of ACC worker Janet Pike in a meeting room by a client over a $300 odd payment. The killing of the WINS office workers in Ashburton by Russell Tully in 2014. And in another workplace, but a remote workplace, we have the killing of a mother and a daughter and the wounding of a third person who were visiting a rural tenanted property in Northland. So that offender as a tenant is their customer, their client. In following this rise of aggressive customer situations, and in particular, those at the extreme end, and if we lay that across our current social landscape, it leaves me with a conclusion that similar incidents most definitely are going to occur in the future. And it is not unreasonable to think that they could occur in any customer-facing organization. Hospitality, retail, corporate, banking, utility services. We simply need to bring the right cocktail of ingredients to the boil at a point in time, and we have that situation occurring again. Mix the motivation, intent, and capability of the aggressor, then aggressive customer situations have the ability to escalate to the use of violence and weapons. And they are so hard to manage. You don't know what's in front of you, and there are elements you don't have control over. And this is what makes it so tough, right? Factors which you have no idea of and no control over in that moment are things like, and you'll all have an appreciation of this, the state of mental well-being of the person that's in front of you, the medication that they are using or not using, their immediate financial stress levels, their propensity for violence and aggression and preparedness to use weapons, the COVID fatigue factor, that's real, and I'm sure many of you have seen that. The culmination of other personal and relationship stress, the compounding effect of some or all of the above. And I consider that again is my pot analogy. It's all of these ingredients coming together at a point in time. So those are the things that you can't control in that moment, but you can very much control your response to those risk flags and those situations and your response to an escalating situation. And if you are in a team environment, you can very much influence a team response that is leader-led. In these critical moments, you're never going to have a perfect response, and that's okay. You don't want that. You want a good, safe response, which is a team response, which is leader-led. Coming back to you now with that opening sort of statement done, we've got a bit of a poll question. So cutting back to you, Wes, if we can bring up that first poll question, please.
Okay, poll question 1 being launched now. Are you seeing a rise in abusive, angry, or aggressive customer situations in your industry? The answers are absolutely, somewhat true, not really, not at all. All right, we'll give it another 10 seconds. Pretty straightforward. Okay. And I'll be sharing the results now.
Excellent. So thanks for your insights there. So, you know, depending on where we sit and what industries we sit, for some there, they're absolutely seeing that. So if that risk is acknowledged, then what I am suggesting is the importance of situational awareness as a life skill. This is a key part to what we bring into organizations as part of a sort of a training response to help deal with this risk. But the importance of situational awareness is it's a life skill that you bring into your work environment. We hold a really, really strong view that situational awareness is the single most important skill that you can acquire for your personal safety and security. Nothing is more important at work and travel and life. And if you buy that and teach your staff some simple framework that can sit in behind it, then you set your people up for success, not only in managing these types of extreme risks, but any risk at work and beyond. And that's why it's that life skill that you simply bring into the workplace. And if you're in a team environment and are managing this kind of risk, having individual and collective ownership with a right and appropriate level of situational awareness certainly helps. And you mix this up with running short, sharp workplace drills to get that desired team response that's leader-led in those critical moments. And then that helps build your capability, capacity, and resilience to those critical moment incidents. So that's where we sort of hold situational awareness has been such a key part of lifting your capability, capacity, and resilience for your workforce. So if we look at a couple of case studies, and I just want to share with you some of the stuff that we've been working with lately, and also a couple of the case study that has been in the media lately. So Luke Lambert, the 42-year-old man, was recently sentenced to 13 years in prison for his violent knife attack on the 4 random customers in the Dunedin Countdown supermarket. On the day, Lambert's debit card was declined at the supermarket when he tried to purchase some beers. He left, fuming. His anger escalated, in part due to his mental state, in part to his violent nature. On returning to the supermarket and in a 90-second frenzied attack, Lambert, with intent to kill, furiously stabbed multiple victims. It was only the actions of brave customers and staff that prevented further injury and death. The scene was understandably one of extreme chaos. If I compare that to the ACC worker in 1999, Janet Pike, she had a meeting with a client at their offices in West Auckland. It didn't go his way. He left fuming. His anger escalated. He obtained a knife, went back to the building, sought another meeting, and stabbed her. He left, she died. So in the organizations we're working with, we're certainly dealing with cases that are occurring that don't make the headlines, like I said earlier, but certainly sit on that scale of 6, 7, and 8. And in some cases, they have used knives as a weapon, and they are super scary situations to deal with. We're dealing with people being physically assaulted, punched and kicked onto the ground by a customer who's literally, my phrase, has just kind of flipped their lid. So with that sort of an understanding of what we're dealing with, I have another question for you. Wes, if you can bring up poll question number 2.
There you go. Do you think it's likely that we'll have a repeat of the countdown type situation in the near future? Options are highly likely, likely, possibly, or not at all. Okay, let's give it another 2 seconds. And go. All right, I'll be sharing the results.
Right. So again, thank you for that quick little bit of feedback. So, you know, essentially we've got our audience that's in front of us, either 100% at either likely or highly likely that these are going to happen again. So if we've acknowledged that the problem statement is true, then, you know, it's incumbent on us that we kind of got to look to how we deal with it. So in terms of some of the solutions that we are helping organizations with, and if you want to take something away from this session, and these are some quick wins that you can implement if you think that there's value in it. Firstly, you've got to acknowledge that the risk is real. And that's, you know, obviously at your executive level, at your health and safety level, but then right down to your frontline level. And then, without knowing where all of your organizations are, but start building or enhancing that safety and security culture. Not one-off training. Training is a part of that culture. We're very big about having leader-led programs, little and often, that keep reinforcing key messages. And do it little and often. We use that now as a strapline of part of organizational vocabulary. One of the best things that I would encourage organizations to do is run drills. If we go back, and I'm sure all of you are thinking now, what drills do we currently run? Well, you're going to be talking about things like fire drills. And we do them because we're mandated to do them. But if we go back far enough into our history, we might think of the Ballantine fire back in the 1930s or 40s or whenever it was, where we had a number of people died in that building who, they didn't have evacuation processes in place. So that's why we do drills. But if we acknowledge that there is a highly likely or an absolute chance of these kind of situations happening in our organizations, then I might suggest that we should be running drills around this kind of response. and they're easy to do. You can have them leader-led. These aren't heavy in time or commitment, but you run them, because I go back to that point. If you want a good response when these things happen, and we're all acknowledging that they are likely to happen, if we want that good response, then that response needs to be a team response. It needs to be leader-led to have that impact. And so running drills around these kind of situations in your environment just helps, again, build that capability, capacity, and resilience in your team. And if you can't practically run drills, then have what-if conversations. Pull your people in and walk and talk yourselves through these situations occurring. For those of you who think there's that likelihood of those extreme end situations, then I'd really encourage that. Have what-if conversations and start looking at running a series of small drills with your team. For those other situations, so if we look back to that scale of 1 to 10, and our extreme ones are most certainly the countdowns at the 10, and the other ones I've spoken to, 6, 7, and 8. Back there, but actually not back far, is the ones around dealing with the abuse. And we're all seeing an increase in abusive situations. And there is a chance that your abusive situation escalates to an aggressive situation or something violent. So it's in this piece where I'd strongly suggest that organizations truly define your line. And by that, I mean, pull your people together, because here's where we often find a mismatch when we pull frontline people in and team leaders and management and above, that they haven't defined their line of what abusive customer situations are occurring and the actual words that are used. So throw down. As an example, and I'm going to go there, so I'm just going to give a little bit of a cautionary note. I'm going to throw down and be that abusive customer, so I'm going to use some abusive language. It's pretty sure it's nothing that you haven't heard before, but this is a real example from an organization that we were dealing with. So I'm stepping into a little bit of role play here now, team. Why don't you fuck off and get me a fucking manager that knows what they're doing, you stupid bitch. That is a real example. And of course, you might all say that that is an abusive customer and we need to respond to that. If I come back from that and then go a situation, look, hey, why don't you just fuck off and get me the manager? Again, yet another example. So truly defining your line, once you have everyone on the same page, because there are another bunch of other isms that sit inside defining your line, racism, ageism, all of these things are occurring in the workplaces and we're seeing it, but not everyone is aligned to what that line is. And here's the next part. Once that line is defined, what is your response process to deal with it? How do you remove that person? How are they taken off premises if that's the desired outcome? Is the sale more important, or is the whatever industry you're in more important, and that you're expecting staff to tolerate it? Some words that came from a person that we ran a workshop with were literally this. 5 years ago, we in no way would have tolerated being told to fuck off. Now it's almost like daily language. So again, there was a case where the line hadn't been defined and the response wasn't clear for all people on how do they deal with that situation when it's in front of them in their environment. So that's a little piece around define the line. And again, that's something that you can take away and deal with right now. And then when I'm picking that most of your organizations will have a level of de-escalation training, and that's right and appropriate. But when you do that de-escalation training, make sure there is a strong focus that the guiding principle to that is always personal safety and security, and that exit tactics are always in play. So if you've got something like a control your controllables as part of your de-escalation, then controlling when you exit yourself, when that line has been crossed, is always the priority. We have seen situations and we've thrown down the question, well, you know, are you always, can every situation be de-escalated? Well, I'm suggesting to you on this chat that the answer is no. Some of them can't be, and you need to be able to, once that line is crossed, exit yourself from that situation safely. So guys, in a very quick summary before I hand over to Webbo We've spoken to some very real and very confronting situations. We've acknowledged that these aggressive customer violent situations have occurred, they are occurring, and we've agreed that there is a likelihood that they will occur in the future. So as leaders, as managers, as organisations, we have a duty of care to help train our staff. And I've walked and talked you through a couple of easy solutions that you might want to pick up and roll with straight away. Webbo's presentation is on crowded place attacks is even more confronting. But there is crossover, particularly in that situational awareness space. Again, it's a life skill. We still hold true to that point that it's the most valuable skill that you can acquire for your personal safety and security. It has place in these aggressive customer situations. And most importantly, and equally importantly, it has place in what Webbo is going to talk about next. That brings my presentation to an end. Now looking to hand over to Craig Webb.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And just better do a quick comms check just to make sure that I'm online and good to go. Awesome. Thanks, Wes. Thanks to everybody for tuning in today and giving us your time to listen to these presentations that myself and Paul are doing. As was mentioned, my name's Craig Webb. I'm the Managing Director of RUSEC Security Limited. Yeah, thanks, Paul, for your previous talk about personal safety and security in the workplace. As you mentioned, there's definitely some overlap, definitely some crossover. And while you're talking away, I was madly scribbling away some notes, just jotting down a few things that really are a great segue into what I'm about to talk about now, and you're right too, it is quite a confronting presentation to give, but one that nevertheless, it's a conversation that needs to be had. Just quickly, a little bit about my professional background. I won't dwell too much on it because Paul's already alluded to some of it. Yeah, I was also a former policeman and spent a number of years on the tactical teams in New Zealand, namely the Armed Offenders Squad and the Special Tactics Group. Now, one of the things that we trained for with those teams were situations that we called in our trade active shooter situations. So an example of an active shooter situation was the unfortunate tragedy down in Christchurch in 2019 with the shootings at the El Nor and Linwood mosques. Unfortunately, that tragic day marked a sad turning point in our nation's history and brought home the reality that our geographical isolation doesn't necessarily give us immunity to the sorts of terrorist incidents that we see overseas. I appreciate that for most Kiwis, some of this presentation will be coming from way out of left field. But sadly, the knife attacks in the Newland countdown that Paul alluded to that occurred last year are a stark reminder that we can't afford to drop our guard, and that there's also much that various business and community organisations can actually do to mitigate the risk of further attacks. The crowded places strategy that I'm about to talk about now does actually give us the tools to do exactly that, to mitigate further risk. It's not the silver bullet, but it's certainly a great starting point. Now, some of you may be wondering why I'd give a presentation that touches on, quite frankly, some pretty harrowing and dark sorts of places. So I'll just take a moment to explain to you what my why is, so to speak. I guess one of the most important criteria for anybody given a presentation of this sort is that you've got to have a bit of passion for your topic. So where does my passion come from? Well, the simple answer is that the crowded places strategy is designed to save lives. In our previous careers, everything that guys like Paul and myself did, whether it was in training or operationally, was geared towards saving lives. And this is where my passion for talking about this topic comes from. In the early 2000s, we were training to respond to the likes of active shooter situations. as they unfolded, which was great and all well and good, but there were no systems or advice for the general public on how to mitigate them from happening in the first place. The crowded places strategy was put together by the New Zealand Police with the help of some other government organisations, and they also had some help from their overseas counterparts as well. The crowded places strategy was finally published in 2020, and now fast forward to 2022, and we finally have a strategy in place, but it's one that probably most people haven't heard about. And on that note, Wes, I'm going to hand it over to you to ask my first poll question, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Okay. Poll question 3 going live. Who has heard of the crowded places strategy? Pretty easy. Yes, I have, or no, I haven't. Interesting. Okay, and I'm going to end the poll in 1, 2, 3. Let's go. Sharing the results now.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Wes. So, yeah, not really a surprising result, to be honest. So 17% of respondents have heard of it, and 83% of respondents haven't heard of it. Like I say, not surprising, to be honest. So in terms of public awareness, that poll really does prove the point that the crowded places strategy is still very much in its infancy. So my goal for this presentation today is threefold. One, it's to raise awareness that the crowded places strategy actually exists. 2, to show that it does actually have the potential to save lives. And 3, to direct you or point you in the right direction of where to find it online. So what is the crowded places strategy? Well, simply put, it's a suite of documents that includes advice, insight, and self-assessment tools to help you mitigate a potential attack. But at its core, it's a strategy that aims to help owners and operators of crowded places protect the lives of people working, using, and visiting their venue. You'll notice there I've boldened and underlined the words protect the lives of people. Just a little bit of a clue there, folks. There'll be another couple of questions coming up shortly, and you might want to remember that. So who should be taking note about this presentation in particular? So basically, anybody in your organisation who has the portfolio for security and the safety and well-being of large gatherings at the likes of shopping malls, airports, sports stadiums, concerts, or any other similar sort of location. The list is non-exhaustive. So the key to it is, if you're in charge of a venue or going to be in charge of a venue where there's likely to be a large gathering, then yeah, by all means, pay a bit of attention to what's being said now. So it's impossible to drill down on all the details of the crowded places strategy because we simply just don't have the time for it in this presentation today. But to give you the nuts and bolts, the crowded places strategy it consists of 5 manuals with a total of 80 pages. Starts with an introduction and goes through various topics like self-assessment tools, security audits, even talks about detecting and responding to hostile reconnaissance, which is basically looking for the telltale signs of somebody who's trying to case your premises for a potential attack. So where do you go to find this strategy? Well, what you do is you log on to the police website at the address that's given down there, www.police.govt.nz/crowded places. And you'll find all of these manuals in PDF form that I've just scrolled through now, and they'll be on that website there. Thoroughly recommend going in there and having a look, and basically over the course of time scrolling through it, have a good read in your own time and get a handle on and what the strategy is all about. Like I say, it's not practical to drill down on all the detail in this presentation yet, but certainly you've got the means to go in there and have a look for yourself. The old adage goes, if you fail to plan, then you're gonna, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. Having a strategy in place like the CPS could literally be the difference between life and death. And that's not intended to be a dramatization for effect. That's the reality of the situation. Paul outlined some pretty harrowing sorts of examples before, and I'll talk about some more again shortly. So things like knowing where escape routes are, contingencies for locking down your venue, or even having the likes of bollards installed at strategic points to prevent hostile vehicles accessing your venue could just make the difference. Now we're going to take a look at a case study very shortly from the UK. And when I'm going through this example, it's not to say that the proprietors of that venue didn't have a plan. But the point of the case study is to show how simple lapses in security can have some pretty catastrophic results. So the case study that I'm going to talk to you about today occurred in the UK, and in particular, it was the Ariana Grande concert at the Manchester Arena back in 2017. So at about 10:30 p.m, a suicide bomber who was working on his own detonated a bomb in the foyer of the stadium as concert goers were exiting the building at the end of the concert. This resulted in the unfortunate deaths of 23 people, including the bomber himself, and injured a further 250. The investigation that followed revealed that there were several missed opportunities to either prevent the incident from happening or at least lowering the casualty rate. And I guess that's where that mitigation side of things comes in. Some examples of the missed opportunities were police officers who were tasked with guarding the foyer left their post prematurely. A member of the public raised concerns about the bomber's suspicious behaviour to security guards, but a lapse in communication between the security guards meant that the bomber wasn't actually approached and further investigation done to see whether he was a threat or not. One of the security guards in a subsequent interview even stated that he didn't want to approach the bomber because he didn't want to be labelled a racist. The reality is that we're all human and prone to making poor decisions. I'm sure we've all got experience in that. We're not perfect. And it's easy to point the finger in hindsight, and that's not what this case study is about. But the public inquiry that followed was quick to point out where some of the failings were in the security apparatus that night. So the take-home point from this slide is, can we here in New Zealand do better? I'd venture to say that the opportunity is there now. Now that you know about the crowded places strategy, the opportunity is there. Are we prepared to do the same due diligence for this type of situation as we would for, say, a natural disaster? And Paul alluded to training drills just before and mentioned the likes of fire drills and earthquake drills and things like that. What I'm suggesting to you in this presentation now is that perhaps you want to add a terrorist incident or an active shooter type incident into your portfolio or your current security plan. And that leads us into the next poll question. Thanks, Wes.
Okay, guys, give me 1 second. Go to next poll question. And there we go. Does your organization have a strategy to deal with terrorist type of incidents? Yes, pretty comprehensive. yes, but it needs to be reviewed. It's a work in progress, and or no, not at all. Okay, let's give about another 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1, go. Sharing the results now. So a lot says work in progress, and a lot of them says not at all. Ooh. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. I actually do take a little bit of heart in those poll results. 40% of you say that it is a work in progress in terms of adding terrorist type incidents to your current strategy. That's quite encouraging. I didn't expect those numbers, to be honest, but no, that's good. So was there another poll question there or a pop quiz there?
Yep.
Wes?
Yep.
Should be
one
another
more.
one there, mate. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Here we go. The crowded places strategy aims to protect what? Please select the answer. To lives of people, business reputations, damage to a venue. We'll give it another 3, 2, 1. Oh, that's a unanimous result.
Fantastic. That's what I was after, Wes. Things
Cool.
I've been listening to. That's great to hear. Thanks, guys. Hey, yeah. So, like I say, that's the crowded places strategy in a nutshell, folks. So I'll just start closing out by saying New Zealand's gradually starting to emerge from a world of COVID restrictions, and our doors are opening to the world again, and large events and venues that host mass gatherings will soon be the norm once again. And as everybody's seen just in the last couple of days, we're starting to see our borders open again. That's great news for all of us, but the flip side, dare I say it, is that it also presents opportunities. Unfortunately, there are wolves in sheep's clothing out there, and at some stage, they are going to look to repeat some of the deeds that the likes of Paul and myself have discussed today. The good news to emphasise here is that we also have an opportunity, and the crowded places strategy gives us that opportunity to make a start on securing our venues in a way that could save lives. And like I say, that's not a dramatisation, that's bang on, that's for real. So just to reiterate once again, where to go to find that strategy. I won't repeat it, but it's there in bold for everybody to take note of. If you've got a pen there, get that down and go and have a look. So, hey, look, in closing out, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Wes and the team at Shop Care. And of course, thank you all for tuning in and listening. I know that for most, this would be a pretty heavy conversation to have, but a necessary one nevertheless. And to that end, I hope that you got something out of it. And by all means, give me a call if you'd like further advice, or I'm sure you may have some questions at the end of this presentation. So both myself and Paul will be all ears and happy to answer where we're required. Thanks very much, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, Craig. Guys, we've got one more poll question coming up while we take your questions to both gentlemen. Launching that poll question right now. Has this webinar been of value to you and inspired you to do things differently? Yes, I find it of value and we'll do things differently. Yes, it's been great to obtain confirmation of what we're doing already. Or no, I haven't learned anything new today. Okay, so going through to the first question. Please, Craig, Paul, feel free to answer any of these. Question one is, how can we as business or organizations out there, how can we educate the community that the customer is not always right? Because that seems to be one of the things, themes out there, that the customer always feel they are right.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a line that we throw down the reverse line, and we acknowledge that the customer is not always right, in particular when that line is crossed, right? We spoke about define the line, and we struggle with working with customer-facing organisations, retail, hospitality, banking, that they've been brought up with this idea that the customer is always right. So I think the first challenge is educating our workforce that is not true. The second part, if your question is how do we educate the community, I think you can do some things to educate the people that come into your environment. So as an example, we are fans of putting in the right places, and without knowing your organisation, it's hard to speak to, but think of something like a retail or banking where you've got close customer contact, that we've got signage up that's saying, hey, abusive behaviour is not tolerated here, and not in policy and procedure type words, and real words that fit your organisation and your culture. And then when it does happen, you can literally just point to that if it's in a meeting room kind of environment, and you can just, you can refer to that and then follow it up with a response plan that you guys have as part of your policy and procedure and way to respond to it. So I think educate your people first, understand what your response will be like to it, and then make sure that is out there in bright lights to your clients. And when that line's crossed, back it up. The sale's not important, the contract's not important. My people have been abused, and that's not acceptable. You're not right.
Yeah, Paul, I might just chime in there as well, if you don't mind, mate. Totally agree with what you're saying. The first line of approach would be through your own workers, but what I'd like to see is more publicity drives out there. And what I mean by that is you see the likes of advertising, whether it be on TV or radio, for lowering the road toll and things like that. I think it's probably about time that, the retail industry perhaps chipped in and perhaps considered putting advertising out there on TV. Just, simple little messages like what Paul said, just in regards to the customer not always being right and defining that line. I think that's pretty important. And I think it's probably about time that message got out there to the public via acceptable forms of media. Thanks.
Thank you, James. Our next question is, what can a health and safety practitioner or any concerned worker do to convince management to implement preventative strategies, even though they have not had an incident or an incident that's severe enough?
Again, another good question. Get them in a room in a facilitated workshop where they can hear from their front line about what their people are facing. And then lay across that some of the incidents that are occurring, and then structure some questions that kind of like we had those same questions. So I gave a little bit of a scene set, and who said, and then we said, what's the likelihood of this occurring inside your environment? The risk is real. So getting them to acknowledge and own the risk is the first part. And part of that is get your people in a room so they can hear it from the front line.
Thanks, Paul.
Webbo?
Okay. Would any of you recommend workers to get physical with a violent and aggressive behavior type of customer if something happens?
It's a really difficult question, and we front this with organizations that we're dealing with, because we're actually using examples inside organizations where they've had to. My response is no. You want to create time and space and exit strategies. You want to be able to understand the risk flags before they escalate to that point. With all of that said, there are times where it just kicks off, and I'm in my head, I'm referring to examples that are real inside organizations, and suddenly people have found themselves in that situation. The comments that I use then that the laws of self-defense don't stop inside an organization. They exist for all of us. then you have the next question about capability and capacity. You don't want any person to step into a situation that they're not capable of handling. And, you know, if we put 50 people in a room, we're all different backgrounds and life skills. So having organizations actually understand that. Then what I say, and these are perhaps words that you can take away with. There are times, and I'm talking about actual incidents that have occurred where people have stepped in, and it kind of contradicts the organization's policy and procedure, right? Because your policy and procedure should be, don't step into these confrontational situations. But time, place, and circumstances, they have occurred. What I encourage people to say there is, what that person did in stepping that, if we're looking at lessons learned, is they did a very human response. They stepped into something and safeguarded themselves or a colleague or something like that. You then have to reinforce what you want the organization to as policy and procedure over top of it. So it's a delicate situation, because when you head down, you start saying, do we actually need to start training our people in self-defense? No, the answer is no. Focus on de-escalation and exit strategies, create time and space, move your people away from it. But in all operational things, there's always contingencies that you need to plan for and be prepared to discuss. Sorry for that long-winded thing, but it's something we deal with semi-regularly.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Paul. Focus on the de-escalation and the exit strategies first. As he says, there is room there for self-defense, but it's something that really needs to be delved into in more depth with staff and training. You know, discussion topics and training around self-defense and things like that. And once again, this presentation doesn't really afford us the time to go too more in depth about it. But focus on, like I say, focus on those de-escalation points first.
Thank you. There's about 3 more questions that I've got so far. If any more questions, guys, make sure that you pop them in the Q&A function. You mentioned it. Both of you have mentioned that we talked about something similar, and Paul, you alluded to all the isms, and Craig, you talked about the security guard that didn't approach the bomber due to he was scared he was going to be called a racist. Do you feel that that is a factor within New Zealand? And because that could have been really a preventative thing, and if so, what can organizations do to overcome that?
Yeah, I'll jump in there with this one, Paul. Training is the short answer. Training. To come back to the earlier part of the question, yeah, some of those things do exist. Some of those hesitancies for our security staff, and it all comes back to training and experience. Really, this is just a starting conversation that hopefully we can work forward from here and get it out there in the industry that, don't be afraid to ask those questions. Be curious, don't necessarily be satisfied with what you see at face value. Go in depth, dig a little bit deeper. But yeah, training is the key to that, I think. Paul, what do you say?
Agreed, mate. And if I come back a level to that first part of that question around these sexism, ageisms, racisms, they're real. And at that, customer service facing organizations, people are copying it out there. And sometimes I find there's a disconnect between the management because they don't see it, they don't hear it. So you've got a reporting issue there. A good thing that you could take away, get your people in a room, throw down some lines. And I did this one the other week. So again, I'm going to step into a bit of role play here. The person who goes, "Go off and get me the fucking manager," that one's an easy one, right? Everyone should be holding up a red card. But what about when I say, "Hey, listen here, sweet cheeks, why don't you just take those lovely legs of yours and go off and get me the manager?" Both are offensive, both are wrong, and both require a response. So get your people to, again, define that line and get a little bit of role play. You might start with people putting up different cue cards, different colored cards saying, they haven't defined that line, but you want to narrow that gap so everyone understands that when that person, that, Asian person behind the counter, or the female, or the nana who's in the volunteer group gets one of those isms thrown down on her, that as an organization, it's not acceptable, and you're going to have a response to it.
Yeah, great. Sorry, just one more point in there too, Wes. I think it's partly about building that culture, that security culture. You know, in the last few years or decade or so, we've certainly come a long way with the health and safety culture and building that culture with respect to mitigating and preventing accidents in the workplace. I don't see this as being any different, you know, that security culture. Maybe it's time to start working a little bit more on that and building that culture as well. Cheers.
Thanks. We've got a question as well here, and it's mainly for you, Craig. How's the Crowded Places strategy being publicized?
Yeah, great question. You've seen it. so far as I'm aware that, and I could be very wrong here, so please forgive me to any security consultants out there who are seeing this and are taking their own steps. As far as I'm aware, we are still, the strategy is still very much in its infancy. I haven't seen any publicising of it around, and I guess it's a little bit hard in some ways to get that sort of a topic out there. So as far as I'm aware, it's simply that online website, and the responsibility comes down to persons in charge of organisations of those sort of venues to go in there. I guess this is a good start to bridging that gap and starting to get it out there. Whether the police or any other agency have got plans in the future for publicising a little bit more, I honestly couldn't tell you. I know the New Zealand Security Association is working away in the background with the New Zealand Police, so perhaps that might come out in the wash a little bit in future. But at this present point in time, it's conversations like this that are really going to draw attention to the strategy and get it out there.
I agree, Craig. Last question. Basically, then our time is up. On recent events, we've got these ram raids. What do you guys think, you know, is driving this, and what can business do regarding these ram raids, you know, to protect their businesses, and not just businesses, but also the actual workers? You know, you mentioned a little bit early on, Craig. You know, it could be a live event with hundreds of people, or it could be just 2 people or 1 person.
Go for it, Paul.
Yeah, look, it's a big topic, right? And it's in the headline. What's driving it? Again, grab a pot and we're just going to throw in ingredients and give it a stir. You know, you've got disaffected youth, you've got lack of schooling, you've got social media driving these kids to commit these offences, you've got social policy and a policing policy, or, you know, our justice system. These young fellas, particularly the young ones, make no bones about it. They sit in their planning rooms and they are smart people. They know that they won't be held to account. They know there is no accountability for some of these youths. They know that the justice system, so the chances of getting caught and the chances of being held accountable in their eyes it just doesn't exist. How does that help businesses? I don't have all of the answers by any stretch. Bollards, as a standalone thing, are a layer and a layer only. They are not going to stop these from happening. If you put up, if your shop is my target and you put a bollard up there tomorrow, I'm just going to go to Bunnings and get a sledgehammer and put it through the window and then get the stuff out. So holding people to account is one thing. My concern in this space is that when we shift, and you know, I've got nothing but gut instinct and you know, professional view, that where we might see a shift in offending type is brazen snatch and grabs during daytime hours, like youths coming into shopping malls, raiding them, using weapons and robbery type offences occurring. So that would be the fear for me, because now you've got public and people and customers in that space. And again, to Webbo's point, and there is a crossover, it is around training your staff to lock down and evacuate and pull customers into safe zones, etc. So it's a big issue that this country, community, iwi, schools, police, everyone's got a role to play here. And it's not an easy fix. And sadly, businesses are going to feel the brunt of it until such time as we start to get a grip on it.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a different take in some ways. Ram raids are nothing new. They've been around for a long time. You know, I mean, where I live, I mean, there was a ram raid at a petrol station just recently, but it wasn't on the 6 o'clock news. So these things have been going on for a long time. I guess what the difference is that we're seeing now is the frequency. And in terms of what's driving it, I'd say there's a number of factors, but one of the big ones will definitely be social media giving it attention. And if we want to talk down at individual level of some of these, some of the people that are committing these crimes, it comes down to ego. That's what I think anyway, and I think that's why we're seeing more frequency of it in the media at the moment. And obviously social media with our young ones has got a lot to do with it as well. How does that help the business community? Well, yeah, like Paul says, bollards are only one answer and they're not going to be a silver bullet. Just for an example, if you've got a large shopping mall that you need to protect, you'll want to be looking at multiple layers of hardening, as we call it. So layer your hardening, the likes of bollards. You may want to consider security guards, getting your security guards to work around the clock at your venue, perhaps, just in the meantime until perhaps things settle down a bit. But yeah, it's not an easy one, and there's no silver bullet to it, unfortunately. Thanks, Wes.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. We can skip on to the next slide. Well, that's basically it for today, guys. Thank you very, very much for coming along and listening to both speakers. I thought it was really, really informative, and there's some really good learnings that I took out today. Thank you to both speakers for making the time and sharing your experience. I mean, I know you guys have seen and heard it all, but for us as the public, we just sit in awe here when we hear about these events and the potential things that we could do. So guys, there are our contact details. There's Craig's details from RUSEC, Paul's details from QRisk. Please make sure reach out to these gentlemen if you've got any other questions or assistance that you require. Said our details are from ShopCare's on there. Make sure to go onto our YouTube channel. This webinar will also be on the YouTube channel by next week. And also join our LinkedIn page if you're not a member yet. One last opportunity for both speakers to have something to say before I say goodbye for today.
You got the floor, Paul.
Thank you, Craig. Big thank you to Wes, and always good to sit alongside Webbo and former mates and colleagues around this kind of stuff. So look, I hope it was insightful. I hope there's some stuff that you can take away and consider and use inside your organisation. It's a tough gig out there and dealing with some of these confrontational situations. So look after yourselves, look after your mates, stay safe, crack on.
Yeah, from me, thanks a lot, Paul. You pretty much took the words out of my mouth, mate. What I will say is that ShopCare, yeah, what a great platform to have these conversation starters with. Like I said, some of the conversations and things that we discussed today were quite heavy, but just to be able to have that platform and get it out there to people that need to know, it's awesome. So look, thanks very much to Wes and the team. Once again, thanks to our audience and our listeners out there. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Excellent. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for coming in today. I hope to see you next time. Till then, see ya.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Ciao.